Hello, welcome back to episode 7 of Odious. This episode is being released alongside episode 6, which is the murder of Lynette White, so be sure to listen to that as well. Today we are going to delve into the heartbreaking murder of Brianna Ghey. If you're from the UK, then the likelihood is you know about this case already, and it is very recent, only taking place last year in 2023. This episode contains sensitive content. Listener discretion is very much advised. Part 1. Who was Brianna Ghey? To understand the full tragedy of Brianna Ghey's murder, it's important to remember who she was beyond the headlines. Brianna was born on the 7th of November 2006 in Birchwood, Cheshire. Growing up, Brianna was diagnosed with ADHD, autism and anxiety, which her mother Esther says impaired her ability to be able to effectively judge when a situation was unsafe or dangerous. Because of these diagnoses, Brianna received one-on-one tutoring in school rather than attending just regular classes. But it's important to note that even though these are one-on-one sessions, other students are still present for their own sessions. It's just smaller than a typical classroom-based lesson. Described by her friends and family as bright, bubbly and unapologetically herself, she had a passion and it would seem a real talent for social media, where she regularly shared her experiences as a transgender teenager on platforms like TikTok, as well as just being involved in normal TikTok trends. So she must have been quite creative too, as she had amassed tens of thousands of followers. Both online and offline, Brianna spoke very candidly about her experience as a transgender girl and was always open to sharing resources and advice on where those in similar situations could access hormone therapy in a safe and legal way. However, Brianna's journey to live authentically wasn't without its struggles. It has been reported that she had faced bullying at school for being trans, with one news outlet claiming she had been gang beaten. But Brianna's school came out with a statement denying she had ever faced bullying at school, which Esther, Brianna's mum, apparently approved. Still, she had dreams of a future where she could thrive and be accepted for who she really was. Her mother, who would play an integral role in raising awareness of Brianna's case, spoke of Brianna's resilience, kindness and determination to carve out a space for herself in a world that wasn't always welcoming. At the time of her death, Brianna was a Year 11 student, only 16 years of age, with so much life ahead of her. Part 2. The murder. What happened to Brianna? On the morning of February 11th, 2023, Brianna received a text message from a fellow student and quote-unquote friend, Scarlett Jenkinson. In this message, Scarlett asked Brianna to meet up with her at a library in Colchester, roughly 3.5 miles away from Brianna's family home in Birchwood, meaning the fastest route of transport would be on the road rather than on foot. So, Brianna got herself ready and was captured on CCTV, leaving her house at 12:45 p.m. before making the 25-minute journey to Birchwood train station and being caught again on CCTV at 1:38 p.m, boarding a bus to get to Colchester. By 1:55 p.m, Brianna had met up with Scarlett as well as another classmate, Eddie Ratcliffe, at the bus stop located outside Colchester Library, the agreed meeting point. The final time Brianna was seen on surveillance footage was just after 2 p.m, heading towards Colchester Linear Park, roughly a 2-minute walk away from the library. What we know from here on out is awful to listen to, but very important to understand the true nature of the attack on Brianna and how fast it took place. At 2:15, Brianna texted a friend expressing some worry over Scarlett's behaviour and generally having a bad feeling about the situation overall. Roughly 15 minutes later, Brianna was viciously and fatally attacked with a hunting knife before being found bleeding heavily, face down, by a dog walker just before 3:15 p.m. She had been stabbed 28 times and her jugular had been severed. Unfortunately, emergency services would pronounce Brianna as dead on the scene at 4:02 p.m. Just utterly heartbreaking to think that Brianna was going about her day normally, probably expecting a normal, maybe fun meet-up with fellow classmates. All I can say is that at least Brianna was found shortly after being attacked, as awful as it is that nothing more could be done to save her life. The thought of her having to lie in a barren woodland on her own after passing away isn't worth thinking about. It's so terrible. So thank goodness she was found within a shortish amount of time. Esther reflects on this day, saying that she joked about having to call the police because Brianna hadn't returned home. However, this would become her worst nightmare when she returned back to the house to see the front door open with 2 officers already inside, telling Esther that they had found a body. Less than 24 hours after the murder, police had already identified and arrested Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe, and immediately set out on deciphering whether this murder was to be classed as an anti-trans hate crime. The murder shocked the local community and quickly garnered national attention, leading to nationwide upset as well as local. Just quickly, Brianna's murderers were 15 years old, and I know some are dubious about naming them, but personally the judge made the decision to name them, and the criminal age of responsibility in England and Wales is 10, so I believe that they should have their identities out there, and because of that I have made the choice to include their names. By February 15th, both Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe had been charged with Brianna's murder and refused bail, whilst awaiting a pre-trial hearing in juvenile detention. Whilst they sat in detention, vigils and memorial services were held up and down the UK in honour of Brianna, whilst multiple campaigns and donation efforts were set up to raise funds for her family, bringing in over £100,000. Brianna was laid to rest on March 15th at a church in Warrington. A pre-trial hearing was held on July 20th, where one suspect pleaded not guilty, and during another pre-trial hearing on October 4th, the second also pleaded not guilty. Between these 2 events, Esther very bravely launched a campaign in Warrington for mindfulness training in local schools as a tribute to her daughter. It would go on to raise over £80,000. And this is constant in this case. I truly don't know how Esther managed to do everything she did in the wake of her daughter's murder, but the way she's conducted herself and the efforts that she's gone to so that her daughter won't be forgotten is just remarkable. Part 3. The culture of transphobia and bullying in schools. To understand the broader context surrounding Brianna's murder, it's important to look at the climate of transphobia in the UK, particularly in schools. In recent years, there has been a disturbing rise in reports of transphobic bullying and violence in educational settings and establishments. Surveys conducted by LGBTQ+ organisations have revealed that transgender students experience higher levels of bullying and harassment than their cisgender peers, often feeling unsafe in school environments that are supposed to protect them. Schools are meant to be places of inclusion and acceptance, yet for many trans students they have become battlegrounds where they are targeted simply for being who they are. In 2022, hate crimes against transgender people increased by 56% in the UK, reflecting a growing hostility fueled by transphobic rhetoric in the media and in politics. This hostile climate trickles down into classrooms and playgrounds, where transgender youth like Brianna are subjected to cruelty and violence. The rise in transphobia is not just a result of individual prejudice, it is being fed by larger social narratives. Part 4. Who were the perpetrators? Turning to the 2 teenagers who were charged with Brianna's murder now, Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe. Scarlett had previously been found in possession of cannabis, which is a Class B drug in England and Wales. She had drugged another student with a cannabis-infused sweet and was actually excluded and moved into Brianna's school over this, leading the incident to be recorded by police as spiking, although Brianna's school reported not knowing that this had actually happened before she moved there. Upon moving, Scarlett and Brianna would cross paths during one-on-one tutoring sessions where they struck up a relationship. Scarlett was also apparently obsessed with serial killers, making notes about Richard Ramirez, Jeffrey Dahmer, John Wayne Gacy, Harold Shipman and others, and had also claimed to have killed 2 people already by the time that she had murdered Brianna. In her notes on serial killers, she would classify their acts and include offender characteristics as well as the ways in which they would commit murders. She also identified herself as a Satanist, but I'm not sure if she actually did practice any Satanism, or if she just saw some serial killers like Richard Ramirez, for example, identifying themselves as a Satanist, and she just decided to try and model her behaviour and personality on him. Eddie was viewed as a role model student. He reportedly had loving and caring parents, was incredibly intelligent with plans to attend uni, and had a keen interest in kickboxing, science, maths. However, this is slightly getting ahead, but I do think it's important to the background of Eddie. Shortly after the trial against Eddie and Scarlett, Eddie's father was actually charged with 2 offences, one for indecent exposure and one for taking indecent images of children. In custody, both Scarlett and Eddie underwent psychological evaluations in which it was initially found that Scarlett showed autistic and ADHD traits, whilst Eddie was actually diagnosed with autism and selective mutism. Part 5, the trial. On Monday the 27th of November 2023, the trial against Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe began at Manchester Crown Court. At this point in time, both suspects were referred to by Boy Y and Girl X due to their ages. The jury consisted of 7 men and 5 women, all of whom were briefed on the context of the case prior to the trial, such as Brianna's identity as a transgender girl and the mental states of both defendants. Both sides would plead their cases, the prosecution showing evidence of premeditation, such as text messages from Scarlett discussing her failed attempt to poison Brianna using ibuprofen, as well as a written note planning out the murder against Brianna, and plans to inflict a similar fate on other children, also shown through text messages. Eddie was the one who gained access to the hunting knife, and Scarlett was portrayed as the mastermind behind the whole attack. However, the defence would argue that their own defendant was an accessory to the act, manipulated and forced into the act whilst the other suspect carried out the murder. The trial would last for 3 weeks, and at the end, the jury thankfully delivered a guilty verdict for both defendants on Wednesday the 20th of December 2023. A day later, the judge would lift the anonymity orders placed on Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe, stating that their identities would be made public due to a strong public interest in the case. Christmas that year would come and go, no doubt one of the most painful times of year for anyone experiencing grief, let alone in such a brutal way. Esther said the following, quote, "We didn't put up a Christmas tree this year because we were at the trial from November, so the Christmas period has been a time to absorb everything and come to terms with it, and to heal really. We've only got a small family and we went round to my mum's and had a quiet day." End quote. She would also say the following, which just demonstrates her utter resilience and empathy, quote, "Please have some empathy and compassion for the families of the young people convicted of this horrific crime. They too have lost a child and must live the rest of their lives knowing what their child has done." End quote. At the beginning of February, sentencing would begin for the 2 murderers, again at Manchester Crown Court. In this hearing, Brianna's family would issue their victim impact statements, while psychiatrists would update on Scarlett and Eddie's mental state, adding that Scarlett was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder rather than autism, but maintained Eddie's diagnosis of mild autism. Despite denying any involvement in the murder and initially not pleading guilty, Scarlett would admit to stabbing Brianna. Both defendants were sentenced to life sentences for a minimum tariff of 22 years for Scarlett and 20 for Eddie. The judge would include the following in her statement, quote, "This was a murder involving sadistic conduct. Eddie, you knew what Scarlett wanted to do and why. You understood a desire to see Brianna suffer. You actively participated in this brutal murder, knowing the desires behind it. I also find you were motivated in part by hostility towards Brianna because she was transgender. Just as you know of Scarlett's motives, she knew of yours. I therefore find you both took part in a brutal and planned murder which was sadistic in nature and where a secondary motive was hostility towards Brianna because of her transgender identity." End quote. So, this was a murder motivated at least in part by anti-trans hatred, which sadly confirmed what many people had believed to have been the case all along. Part 6. The media and reactions. The media response to Brianna Ghey's murder was mixed. The majority of news outlets, thankfully, particularly in the mainstream press, reported on her death with sensitivity, emphasising her identity as a transgender girl and the need for better protections for the trans community, as well as including her mother and wider family in interviews rather than reporting on her murder in their own words alone. However, in the days and weeks following her death, certain sections of the right-wing media and online commentators began to twist the narrative. It's really disappointing to have to say, but some online social media sites such as TikTok saw jibes being made about Brianna's case and identity. Additionally, during Prime Minister's questions, then PM Rishi Sunak came under fire for accusing then leader of the opposition Keir Starmer of finding it difficult to quote-unquote define a woman. Whether this was intentional or not, this comment came at a time when Brianna's case was a top headline almost every day in the news, so many felt that this was incredibly cold and very wrong, to say the least. In an era where trans issues have become a political battleground, Brianna's murder was co-opted by far-right commentators as part of a broader attack on transgender rights. Some downplayed her identity or misgendered her in reports, while others used her death as an opportunity to push anti-trans rhetoric. This hostile response highlights how entrenched transphobia has become in certain parts of society. Rather than coming together to mourn the loss of a young girl and address the real issue of transphobic violence, some use her death to further their own hateful agendas. Part 7. The Legacy of Brianna Ghey's Case. Brianna Ghey's murder has left a profound mark on the fight for transgender rights and safety in the UK. Her case has sparked wider conversations about the dangers facing transgender youth, the responsibility of schools to protect students from bullying, and the role that media and politicians play in shaping and reshaping public attitudes. Since her death, thousands have gathered to honour Brianna's memory and demand justice for the transgender community as a whole. Her name has become a rallying cry in the ongoing battle against transphobic hate in the UK, and her story has inspired many to speak out against discrimination. Esther Ghey has gone on to invest time and donations into Peace in Mind, a project aiming to help students with their mental health, and has also met with Scarlett Jenkinson's mother, which is incredibly strong. In the years to come, we may see new laws or policies designed to better protect transgender youth, thanks in part to the awareness raised by Brianna's tragic death and the ongoing work invested by Esther Ghey. Documentaries and in-depth reports are currently being produced to ensure that her story and the broader issue of transphobia are never forgotten. Thank you all for listening to this episode on the murder of Brianna Ghey. Any active charities or fundraising will be included in the descriptions on Spotify and YouTube. Next week will be another double bill, this time on the Rendlesham Forest incident and the murder of Charlie Taylor. And then it will hopefully be plain sailing and I'll get my shit together and actually stick to a recording schedule. So hopefully I will catch you next week. So until then, bye!